Voting rights will be center of attention today when President Biden and Vice President Harris travel to Atlanta. In something of a shift here, the president is expected to say in his remarks that he supports a filibuster carve-out, which would be a change in Senate rules when it comes to voting rights legislation. Congressional correspondent Stephanie Lieberman joins us now live. Stephanie, what will be the reaction to the president's support of a filibuster carve-out? And can you quickly walk our viewers through what exactly that means?
Absolutely. So I would expect the reaction to the president's speech today to be as partisan as you would anticipate. Some Democrats, especially those who have long wanted to change or eliminate the filibuster, are going to be thrilled that they have the president on their side. While Republicans are likely to be very vocal about disagreeing and opposing, they might even accuse the president of flip-flopping. I wouldn't be surprised if I see Republicans share some old sound bites or interview snippets of the president where he might talk about his previous support for keeping the filibuster as it is. Now, what we're talking about, the filibuster, this is that 60 vote threshold that most pieces of legislation need to get through in order to get through the Senate. Now, what we don't know is exactly what changes are still on the table. There are a slew of ideas that Democrats especially have been talking about, from a one-time exception like we saw with the debt ceiling at the end of last year, maybe a perpetual exception for democracy or voting rights legislation. There's also been talk of a talking filibuster requiring lawmakers to stand on the Senate floor in order to try to block a bill, maybe lowering the threshold from 60 to a lower number. A lot of options on the table, so we'll just have to wait and see exactly what the president throws his weight behind today and how Democrats take the baton from there and move forward.
Very interesting. So what current federal bills are lined up in Congress to expand voting rights and election reform laws?
So there are two pieces of legislation that Democrats are focused on. This is the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. The Freedom to Vote Act, that is your more wide-ranging election reform bill, touches on dozens of ways, dozens of parts of election administration: voting by mail, early in-person voting, drop boxes, voter registration, partisan gerrymandering, campaign finance reform, all sorts of, impact for elections and voting that would set a new nationwide standard. Then you also have the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. That would basically reestablish a pre-approval process for states to change their election laws. Now, this is something that Democrats have been trying to get back into place after the Supreme Court decision back, I think it was in 2013, that, took out a portion of the Voting Rights Act from the 1960s. Basically, this would require states with a history of racial gerrymandering to get any election changes pre-approved with the federal government or with the Department of Justice. Now, both of these bills almost universally opposed by Republicans, which is why Democrats are talking about changing that filibuster, because there is that 50-50 split in the Senate. So if, they want to keep the filibuster in place, they would need Republican support, which they just don't have right now.
All right, Stephanie Lieberman reporting for us this morning. Thank you.
All right, for more context, we're joined by Senior Fellow at the Center for American Progress, Michael Sozan. Michael, welcome to Morning Rush. Good morning to you. So the president, just miles from here this afternoon, will say this marks a turning point in this country. He will ask the American people, will we choose democracy over autocracy, light over shadow, justice over injustice? How will it be received that he is trying to carve out a one-time exception to the filibuster rule to get voting rights through?
I think it's going to be received very positively. There are a lot of Americans who have been kind of demanding and asking and pleading for the for the president to really stand up and use his bully pulpit to fight for democracy, to fight for free and fair elections. It's something he's talked about for a while. He talked about it certainly when he was running for president. And I think now he's moving into a more aggressive stage because he sees that there are really high stakes for our democracy right now. The right to vote, the free and fair elections are basically under attack in many states, including in Georgia.
So we spoke with a voting rights activist last hour, in the 7 o'clock hour, and he was saying, activists and coalition groups, they say, okay, president and vice president, if you're going to come to Atlanta, come with a plan of action. How symbolic is it that the president and the vice president are coming to Georgia specifically to talk about these voting rights?
I think it's very symbolic. Georgia, for better or worse, is near the top of the radar right now across the nation in terms of elections, right? I mean, it was historic in Georgia recently when they elected a Democratic president. They also voted for two Democratic senators. So it was a change for Georgia, a big step. And I think that in many ways it reflects Georgia's growing diversity and move towards a more, multicultural, multiracial society, which is happening across the nation. But there's a lot of pushback to that. And sadly, in Georgia, as you know, the state legislature and the governor signed into law a series of provisions that would really suppress the vote, that would really hurt minorities and their ability to vote, and really is a step back in our nation's history. 16 other states have done the same thing, and a lot of these laws that have been pushed through on party lines across these states have been built on the big lie, which was that there was a tremendous voter fraud in the presidential election, which led to an improper result. And we know that that is just not true. But sadly, Georgia legislators and a number of other states have moved forward based on that big lie to try to suppress votes.
I mentioned the headline, which is the carve out of the filibuster rules, but the other headline here is Stacey Abrams, the most powerful Democrat in this state, arguably, who will run for governor, won't attend. Raphael Warnock, the senator from Georgia, those are the two most powerful black leaders in the state of Georgia, won't attend either remarks today. That's from Biden or Harris. How does that undercut the message?
Well, it definitely shows the challenges that the president and the vice president are facing here. For months, people have really encouraged them, have pleaded with them to become more active on this issue. And to their credit, they have. And they have been speaking out about it more, the need to pass the federal legislation to set baseline standards across the country so that people have a right to vote and that elections cannot be sabotaged. But a lot of people also wish that the president would lay out more of a specific plan. That's what they've been asking. They've been asking for him to call for a reform to the Senate filibuster and a plan so that these bills can actually pass. So I think that's what you're seeing is a little bit of frustration, but let's wait and see what his remarks are today, the remarks from the president and the vice president. I believe that they do plan to be much more specific this time, and I think that a lot of people who have been frustrated up until now with a little bit of inaction might be pleasantly surprised.
So for our viewers who may not live in Georgia or one of those states where there have been restrictive voting laws passed, let's walk our viewers through what restrictions are already there and why is it so restrictive?
Sure. So what we see from a lot of the bills that were passed in these 17 states across the country is a real scaling back on options for people to safely and securely vote, to have access to the ballot box. So there was a lot of scaling back, and this includes in Georgia too, scaling back on the ability to vote by mail, the ability to drop off your mail ballot in a secure drop box, the ability to vote early in the days leading up to the election, so you don't have to vote on election day, and that there be enough sufficient hours. And also there are, troubling provisions, for example, in the Georgia law that allow partisan lawmakers to remove county officials who oversee elections. That's actually happened in several Georgia counties already where Democratic officials have been removed from county boards. What the federal legislation would do is say, no, these sorts of things, these sorts of scale backs or these sorts of election subversion tactics are not allowed. And they're going to set a national baseline standard so that no matter in which state you live, you can be relatively assured that your right to vote is going to be protected. You're going to have all those options to safely and securely vote and to make sure that the votes are counted correctly and that the results can be trusted.